Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name's Abby. For those of you who don't know me, I am the development manager. So thank you for being here. I'm excited to introduce JD. Real quick, I'm just going to read through his bio to give you an introduction. So JD Walsh is a multimedia artist. He has exhibited at galleries internationally, including Halsey McKay, Cleopatra's 106 Green, Brennan and Griffin, and Nicole Klagsbrun in New York, Galerie Steinek in Vienna, and Cooper Cole in Toronto. In 2012, his public art installation, Ensemble for Mixed Use, was commissioned by the City of Toronto for the 2012 Nuit Blanche Festival. His work has been written about in Artforum, Flash Art, and Sculpture magazine, among others. His ongoing music project, Shy Layers, has garnered critical acclaim and was listed as one of the top 20 electronic albums of 2016 by Pitchfork. So very impressive. And that's, I have to say, personally, one of my favorite parts of JD's work is the combination of his music practice, visual art. So definitely excited to have you dive in and talk a little bit more about that. So take it away, JD.
Thank you, Abby, and thanks everyone for being here. I know it's a kind of a weird day to talk about art, but maybe we can recharge the batteries a little bit here. Okay, so like Abby said, my name's JD Walsh. Most of my friends call me Dan Walsh. There's another Dan Walsh artist, and at a certain point it got really confusing, so I just go by my initials now. Anyway, I'm just going to jump in. I'm glad Abby mentioned the music and art practice. For a long time now, I've had these sort of dual practices of sound and music and visual art. And I thought I would take that as a sort of jumping off point today to introduce you to what I do and talk specifically about the relationship between those two practices in my art, how they sometimes come together, sometimes they veer apart a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen and show you just a few slides. This will be a very abbreviated, not quite a lecture, but you'll get the... I'm going to start with a piece that's pretty recent. Those of you who live in Atlanta may have seen this in a recent exhibition called the Temporary Art Center, which was a temporary art exhibition in an old warehouse. It was a huge space, and a lot of us artists that were in it got to expand and spread out and work a little bit more large scale than we normally do. So this is documentation from that. And the reason I wanted to start with this is because it is a good example of my music practice and sound practice and visual art practice sort of coming together. And this is kind of hard to explain, but the best way I can do it is that it's sort of a musical fountain. It has these neon colored eye that actually drips water or tears or however you want to interpret it. And it just sort of drips at whatever rate it's going, and it hits this metal plate as it falls down and sort of drains down. But when each droplet hits the plate, it sounds off a musical note and in a predetermined scale. And so what essentially happens is that as the water flows and the music drips down, it creates a randomized musical composition that is only controlled by whatever way the water decides to drip at any given moment. So there's a level of chance and a level of indeterminacy there. And I have a short video. I'll probably talk a little bit over this, and I'll show a few videos and I'll kind of skip around down a little bit. Very short video. The timbre of the music and the sound itself are sort of determined by a predetermined algorithm that I wrote in a computer that's processing this stuff live. All right, so you get the idea there. So that I was happy with the way that I feel like that was something I've been striving to do for a long time, but it's been hard to have this sort of open-ended nature to the composition where I really didn't know what was going to happen or exactly how to make that composition happen without it being really prescribed and sort of predetermined. The next thing I'll show you, and I'll just show you this quickly, is a much earlier example of me trying to do this thing. This is a video, probably 10 or 11 years old, that combines sort of gestural painting with a sound loop. And I'm just going to jump right into it. You'll see a paintbrush sort of appear. It appears almost as it's painting on this hi-hat cymbal. And then sounds are dubbed in every time the brush hits the surface. So it's almost like a Foley, it's like a cinematic dubbed in sound effect. Anyway. I'll just skip ahead to a later part in the video. So I think what I was really going for here was this sort of sensory confusion, or almost like a reverse synesthesia, right? Where visuals become sounds and sounds become visuals, and to sort of flatten this weird sensory experience. At a certain point, I did this piece with triangles, which was perfect. Talk about, perfect symbol for visual and music sort of coming together. I got really interested in creating a pattern out of this instrument, but it's also something that resonates and can make sound. And I did a version of this here at the Atlanta Contemporary in their Sliver space a few years ago, and you'll see some of that documentation here. I projected there on a few different transparent screens, so it's very three-dimensional. Let me turn up the sound. So this is the window. So you can see it has these layers. Anyway, yeah, you get the idea with that. At a certain point, I started taking some of these elements and putting them together in larger scale, like room installations. And this was more designed to be an immersive environment that you could enter in and sort of wander around, and certain elements would come in and out at different moments. Again, trying to create this sort of random composition using almost like long loops where sometimes they sync up and sometimes they don't. This particular piece was a collaboration with a band Spoon, and they gave me one of their songs to sort of deconstruct, and I took elements of it and assigned them to across the different elements. This is a 4-channel video installation called Outliers. And you can see the symbol. You see the symbol makes an appearance again, and the triangles. I would place these objects on the speakers to sort of use as almost like a percussion instrument, so they could react to the vibration of the speaker. So here, I was also really started to become interested in the shapes of things and the sort of geometric, using these very basic shapes, like a language of just elementary triangles and ovals and circles and squares. And after that point, I think I took a step back for a moment from the video, time-based element, and just kind of focused on the formal qualities of those shapes for a while. So this is one of the very earliest experience of my 2D work or my wall works. And so I would take these compositions made out of wood and just sort of wrap them in different fabrics. And I was kind of treating it like a musical composition where certain elements would recede into the background and certain ones would be foregrounded, others would be mysterious. Color would become an element of this sort of washy, atmospheric kind of thing. There's another one. These are probably from around, 2013, I want to say, 2014 maybe. And then eventually I lost the fabric altogether, and this is sort of becoming more recent work where I wanted to really focus on the formal qualities of these things. I would incorporate silk screen, and it's actually dimensional, so there's 2 layers of wood, so it kind of recedes and foregrounds different elements of it. And I would get these cut using a robotic CNC router. So I wanted to be very precise and mechanical, and I wanted to sort of mask any quality of the material. So I didn't necessarily want it to look like wood. I wanted it to look like sort of any industrial process, almost like in a Warholian kind of way. And then, of course, color would be a big part of that. And eventually, they started getting more and more complex. This one has almost like a nautical kind of theme. And then even more complex, this one was pretty big. It was like, I want to say 5 feet across, maybe 6 feet across. And then very Baroque. This one is actually sitting behind me right now. This was quite large. This is probably 6 feet tall, and was actually hanging in the Contemporary on the studio artist wall for a little while. And I was also really interested, I think, in mark making and then digital sort of mark making, where it seems like a very ancient thing to do, just to sort of carve out wood. But I like the idea of this sort of high-tech machine doing this very ancient process. But that kind of leads me to this, which is a very recent piece. This was done during the quarantine. And you can see it's much less precise. I didn't have the ability to send it out like I normally would to get cut and to get processed by these machines. So I had to I was just able to sort of do it the best that I could. But what I kind of liked about it is that it has this sort of shakiness of the hand, and you can see maybe more of the human quality. It looks almost like a doodle or something. These also, these last few, I feel like they also began to take a more landscape quality to them. And I think this one is no different. And oddly, my musical practice sort of also made that shift into a more sort of a ambient landscape quality around the same time. So this was actually part of the Contemporary's 1-for-1K initiative that they're doing for selling pieces by the studio artists for $1K, $1,000. And then, of course, I always go back to, this is the last slide, I always go back to time-based media here and there. This was at the Contemporary a few years ago, where it's just projecting these sort of video textures that I would synthesize with what's called a video synthesizer. So these are just like algorithmically generated images that are projected onto these shapes, giving it a sort of depth and a sort of environment. I created a soundtrack to go along with it. I'll turn it up briefly. I guess we're getting towards the end of the time here, but I wanted to, let me stop the share. I wanted to leave time for any questions or answers that y'all might have. Again, thanks everybody for coming. I guess we can open it up.
Yeah, that was wonderful. We had one question in the chat from Jordan Amirkhani, and she sort of said that you answered a few of them, but I definitely want to point it out or perhaps ask a question myself to kind of elaborate on it. She was curious to know She said the works you've shown are really interesting. They seem to require a unique method of display and installation to confuse sensory data, as you say. Could you talk about the role of installation in your work? And I guess maybe to elaborate on that a little bit, beyond kind of what you've already discussed, I'm kind of curious to know a little bit more about like physical environment with pairing with these objects in these videos, and also perhaps the relationship to that and the audience, starting to kind of develop this work and putting it out into a physical environment where it's going to be perceived obviously very differently on here today than it would be in person. Like, what role does that play in either your planning process, or how does that kind of inform or alter your process?
Yeah, it's a great question. They're all great questions. I've always been interested in that kind of open-endedness, I guess, and to not be too prescriptive in what I want the audience to get out of it. And I feel sort of indebted to like John Cage or Duchamp or these artists that sort of, I don't know, I feel like it's respectful for the audience to allow them to bring their own experiences and associations to the work. And so part of that is just, in the planning process, like what parameters can you leave up to chance? Like in the example of the water droplets or the tears, I don't have any control or much control over the way that physically drops. It's the environment and it's the viscosity of the water, whatever physics type of things. And so I like being able to outsource certain decisions to chance. Okay, so I think that has something to do with the way that you can think about this in the environment as well, right? So like when you have a multi-screen environment and people are able to walk through it as they wish, it's up to them, and they can experience it for a long time or a little bit of time. They can walk right through it. They can focus on one part of it, and so I think as an artist, you also have to prepare for different such scenarios. I mean, I still like to make works for the wall, which is a very common environment, obviously, to see artwork. So it really depends. It really does depend. As far as the relationship between music and art, this is a question I get asked a lot, and I don't see the two as being all that different. I think that a lot of artists could be musicians, and a lot of musicians could be artists if you treat it like if you treat a musical composition like an artwork. In both instances, you have to deal with texture and scale and content. If you're using lyrics, like what's that all about? You have to deal with dynamics and juxtapositions and associations and things like that. So I've always kind of approached both in the same way.
JD, I do see that, and I never noticed this until I saw everything kind of back to back. But am I wrong in seeing the golden ratio or Fibonacci kind of in the background of the works, and does it appear in the music?
I don't know that I've ever purposefully tried to use that in music. The spirals, I think, have been a recent design element that I've started incorporating into the work, and I do like it as a design element. I mean, I think it does have to do with this nautical sort of thing, so it sort of puts it in the same place as landscape. I think it references landscape painting in some way. But I also just love it as a design element. It's just a beautiful shape.
What material did you say that the piece behind you is? That wood?
It's like MDF. Yeah, it's like a fiberboard, and then I send it off to this place in North Georgia. That's like a sign making company, and then they, I just send them an Illustrator file, and then they route out these channels. So it's like a bit of a relief, and then I hand paint it when I get it back. So it comes back to just like a raw wood.
Okay, you use acrylic to hand paint it, or what?
It is? Yeah, it's acrylic just rolled on. Yeah. But I try hard to eradicate a lot of the brushiness. Or it's a very, like, it's almost confusing. Like it could be plastic or it could be anything really.
Yeah.
Cast.
I have one last question before we end, even though we're getting close. So, we were talking at the 1 for 1K and the piece is up, and we put it in the chat because it is still available. But do you think that you're going to go back to the more kind of sophisticated router like the one behind, or do you think you might marry the physicality together?
That's a great question. I think that I will actually try to sew it by hand again, at least, because number one, it's I can turn it around faster. I think there's something to be said for just getting it done, when the moment strikes. That's what's another benefit of that is that, I have an idea, let's try it out. And there's maybe more room for experimentation and failure, which is another important part, I think, for any artist, to be able to try something and go, whoa, I took that way too far, and dial it back. And it's harder when you have to, you spend money on things that kind of have to be right, So I think that is another benefit to doing it that way. Thank you everyone so much for coming. It means a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for coming today and participating in this. We really do appreciate your support. We're going to wrap up for today, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.